She saved the Mafia boss's child, but never expected to heal his broken heart. Before we dive into the story, tell me where in the world you're watching from, and if this story steals your heart, please hit subscribe. The first sound was a pop, sharp and dismissive, easily mistaken for a child's balloon bursting in the cavernous echo of the Grand City Aquarium. Anna, counting the bobbing heads of her 17 kindergartners, didn't even flinch. It was only when the second sound came, a percussive crack that was deeper, more violent, that she felt a cold dread spill through her veins. It was followed by the unmistakable shattering of immense glass. 1,000 gallons of the Pacific Ocean and the iridescent life within it exploded into the Great Hall. Panic erupted, a wave of human screaming that was more terrifying than the water. Anna's training, the endless drills for fires and earthquakes, took over. Her voice, usually soft and encouraging, became a sharp, clear command. "Otters, hold hands! Pufferfish to me, now!" The children, wide-eyed with a fear they couldn't comprehend, scrambled towards her, their small hands finding each other in a chain of instinct. But one was missing. Her eyes scanned the chaos, the fleeing bodies, the shimmering water spreading across the polished marble floor. And then she saw him. Matteo. He was standing alone near the wreckage of the main tank, his small body frozen, a little red toy car clutched in his fist. His security detail, 2 imposing men who shadowed him like monoliths, were gone, one on the ground, the other staggering near a pillar, a dark stain spreading across his suit jacket. Time seemed to warp, slowing and stretching as Anna moved. She pushed through the frantic crowd, her practical cardigan catching on a panicked woman's handbag, her sensible ballet flats splashing through the rapidly spreading water. She reached Matteo and dropped to her knees, ignoring the sting of glass shards she could feel through her jeans. His face was pale, his dark, curly hair plastered to his forehead, his shy gaze fixed on the fallen man who was supposed to protect him. "Matteo," she said, her voice a low, steady anchor in the storm of noise. "We need to go. We're going to play a game. The quietest mouse." He didn't respond, his small frame trembling uncontrollably. The pops were closer now, a brutal rhythm punctuating the screams. Without a second thought, Anna wrapped her arms around him, pulling him tight against her chest and turning her own petite body into a shield. She covered his head with her hand, pressing his face into her shoulder as she crab-walked backward, dragging him toward the relative cover of a large, overturned information kiosk. "It's okay," she whispered into his hair, the words a desperate prayer. "I've got you. You're safe with me." When the sirens finally overwhelmed the sound of gunfire, a new kind of chaos descended. Uniformed officers and paramedics swarmed the hall, their movements urgent and methodical. Anna remained crouched behind the kiosk, holding the still-shaking boy, her entire focus narrowed to the small, warm weight in her arms. A paramedic knelt beside her, his face grim but kind. "Miss, we need to check the boy. Is he hurt?" Anna shook her head, not daring to loosen her grip. "He's just scared." Matteo burrowed deeper, his small fists clutching the fabric of her sweater. "I need to take him," the paramedic said gently. "We have a triage area." Anna felt a surge of protectiveness so fierce it stole her breath. They couldn't take him. He was in shock, clinging to the only stability he'd found. Separating him from her now would be another trauma layered upon the first. A lie, impulsive and absolute, sprang to her lips. "I'm his nanny," she said, the words tasting foreign in her mouth. "I can't leave him. He needs me." The paramedic hesitated, his gaze flicking between her earnest, expressive hazel eyes and the child who was practically fused to her. The lie seemed to settle the matter, giving her a legitimacy she hadn't possessed a moment before. It was another 20 minutes before he arrived. A path cleared through the emergency personnel as if by an invisible force. Luca Caprese moved not like a man walking through a room, but like a storm front consuming it. He was tall, dressed in a 3-piece charcoal suit that seemed immune to the surrounding chaos, his olive skin stretched taut over a sharp jawline. A faint, silvery scar bisected his lower lip, a relic of a past that the bespoke tailoring couldn't entirely conceal. His storm-gray eyes swept the scene, assessing, cataloging, and dismissing everything until they landed on his son. For a fraction of a second, a crack appeared in the locked vault of his expression, a raw, naked fear that he quickly suppressed. He knelt before them, his movements economical and precise. He didn't reach for Matteo immediately, his gaze instead falling on Anna, taking in her disheveled low bun, the tear in her cardigan, and the fierce, unwavering grip she had on his child. "Mateo," he said, his voice a low baritone that cut through the noise. The boy flinched but didn't look up from Anna's shoulder. "He's in shock," Anna murmured, her own voice trembling slightly now that the immediate danger had passed. "He won't let go." Luca's eyes met hers, and they were colder and harder than any she had ever seen. He was a man who trusted no one, whose entire world was built on control, and she was an unknown variable in the worst moment of his life. One of his men, his face a mask of grim efficiency, leaned down. "Boss, the paramedic said she's the nanny." Luca's gaze remained on her, intense and unblinking. He could have exposed her lie with a single word, had her removed, dismissed her as a civilian caught in the crossfire. But he saw the way his son's knuckles were white from clutching her sweater. He saw that for whatever reason, in the midst of an ambush orchestrated by his enemies, this small, steady woman in ballet flats had become his son's entire world. Protecting Mateo was the only thing that mattered. For now, her lie was more useful than the truth. He gave a nearly imperceptible nod. "Get the car ready," he commanded his man, before turning his attention fully back to Anna. "You're coming with us." It was not a request. It was a statement of fact, the first link in a chain she could already feel tightening around her. Part 2. The drive to the cliffside villa was a silent, surreal journey through the city's gleaming arteries. Anna sat in the back of a black, armored sedan that smelled of rich leather and cold power, with Mateo asleep in her lap, his small body finally succumbing to exhaustion. Luca sat opposite them, a statue carved from anger and control, his gray eyes fixed on the rain-streaked window but seeing something else entirely. A tactical map of threats, a list of traitors, a thirst for retribution. The silence was heavy, thick with unspoken questions and the low thrum of the engine. Anna's mind raced, replaying the lie she had told. It had been a reflex, a desperate bid to protect a terrified child, but now, in the chilling presence of his father, it felt like a monumental, life-altering mistake. She was a kindergarten teacher. Her world was finger paints, scraped knees, and story time. His world, she was quickly learning, was armored cars, fallen bodyguards, and a gaze that could strip a person bare. The car turned off the main highway, ascending a winding private road before stopping at a set of towering steel gates. A discreet biometric scanner glowed green, and the gates slid open with silent, deadly efficiency. The villa was less a home and more a monument to wealth and paranoia. It clung to the cliff's edge, a fortress of glass and stark white stone overlooking the turbulent ocean below. Inside, the decor was minimalist and severe, filled with sharp angles, cold marble floors, and vast windows that showcased the dramatic, lonely view. It was a beautiful prison, and Anna felt the lock turn the moment she stepped inside. A severe-looking housekeeper led her to a guest suite that was larger than her entire apartment, its furnishings opulent but impersonal. "Mr. Caprese insists you remain here," the woman said, her tone leaving no room for argument. "For your safety, and for Mateo." Anna's protest died in her throat. Her independence, the quiet, self-sufficient life she had built for herself, was being stripped away with a terrifying ease. She was no longer Anna, the teacher. She was a security measure, a living comfort object for a traumatized boy, a pawn in a game whose rules she didn't understand. Days bled into a strange routine. She spent her time with Mateo, who followed her like a shadow, his hand always seeking hers. He was a sweet, solemn child, and the bond between them deepened with every book she read, every Lego tower they built. But the nights were the hardest. The shootout had fractured his sense of safety, and he was plagued by nightmares that left him screaming, his small body rigid with terror. The household staff, and even Luca himself, were helpless against them. Only Anna could calm him. She would sit with him in the dark, humming soft lullabies and whispering stories until his trembling subsided, and he drifted back into a fitful sleep. It was during one of these late-night vigils that Luca began to seek her out. He would appear in the doorway of Mateo's room, a silent silhouette against the dim hallway light, watching them. He never spoke much, but his presence filled the space, a mix of gratitude, suspicion, and a weary sorrow that seemed to emanate from his very core. Their interactions were clipped, formal, but charged with a palpable tension. He would question her about Mateo's day, his voice devoid of emotion, his gray eyes scanning her for any sign of deception. She, in turn, refused to be intimidated. She answered him directly, her gaze steady, challenging the invisible walls he built around himself. "He needs to play outside," she told him one afternoon, finding him in his cavernous office, a space that overlooked the churning sea. "He needs fresh air and sunshine, not just filtered air and bodyguards." Luca looked up from a stack of documents, his expression unreadable. "It's not safe." "Then make it safe," she countered, her spine of steel making a rare appearance. "Build a playground in this gilded cage of yours. He's a little boy, Luca, not a state secret. He needs to feel the grass under his feet." She used his first name for the first time, and the sound of it hung in the air between them, a small act of defiance. A flicker of surprise, or perhaps something else, crossed his face before the mask of indifference slammed back into place. "I'll see to it," he said, his tone clipped. The next day, a construction crew arrived, and within a week, a state-of-the-art playground, complete with soft turf and a miniature climbing wall, stood in a secure section of the immaculate gardens. He had listened. The realization was as unsettling as it was satisfying. She was beginning to have an effect on him, and in this world of danger and isolation, that felt like the most perilous thing of all. She was drawn to the broken man beneath the ruthless CEO, tempted by the glimpses of the devoted father, and terrified of what it would mean to let herself fall into his orbit completely. Part 3. The past always finds a way to claw its way back to the surface. For Anna, it arrived in the form of a vibrating phone on the marble countertop of the villa's kitchen. The number was blocked, but she knew who it was. The dread was a familiar, sickly feeling, a cold stone in the pit of her stomach. She answered, her voice tight. "What do you want, Mark?" His voice, slick with a false charm she now recognized as poison, oozed through the receiver. Well, Annie, looks like you've landed on your feet." "I saw the pictures. Cozying up to a billionaire. Never took you for a gold digger." A paparazzi photo, a long-lens shot of her and Matteo in the new playground, had been published on some gossip site. It was grainy and intrusive, but it was enough. Mark, her ex-boyfriend, was a creature of opportunity, a small-time grifter with a cruel streak who had spent 2 years systematically dismantling her self-worth. Escaping him had been the hardest thing she had ever done. "I have nothing to say to you," she said, her voice shaking despite her best efforts to keep it steady. "Oh, I think you do," he sneered. "See, a story like this is worth a lot of money. Hero teacher's secret past. Or maybe I go to your new boss, tell him his precious nanny is who she says she is, tell him about us. I can be very creative." The threat hung in the air, vile and potent. He wanted money, of course, but more than that, he wanted to see her squirm. He wanted to reclaim the power he once had over her. She ended the call, her hand trembling as she set the phone down. The illusion of safety she had begun to feel within the villa's walls shattered, replaced by the chilling realization that her old cage had found her, even here. She resolved to handle it herself. She would not drag Luca and his dangerous world into her messy past. She would not give Mark the satisfaction. But Luca's world saw everything. His intelligence network was not just for business rivals and mafia threats. It was an omnipresent web that guarded his life, and now, by extension, hers. Less than an hour after the call, as Anna sat staring numbly out at the ocean, Luca entered the room. He didn't speak, simply placed a tablet on the table in front of her. It displayed a comprehensive file on Mark Renshaw, his criminal record, his gambling debts, his current whereabouts. Every sordid detail of the life she had escaped was laid bare in cold, hard text. "He contacted you," Lucas stated, his voice flat, devoid of question. Anna flinched, feeling exposed, ashamed. "I can handle it," she insisted, her pride a flimsy shield. Lucas' gaze was hard, unforgiving. "By giving him what he wants, by letting a parasite like him dictate terms to you." He leaned forward, his presence overwhelming. "Men like that don't stop. They feed on fear. The only way to deal with them is to cut them out. Completely." She never found out exactly what he did. There was no overt violence, no news report of a body found in a ditch. It was quieter, more insidious. Over the next 48 hours, Mark Renshaw's life was systematically erased. His bank accounts were frozen due to a sudden, inexplicable fraud investigation. He was evicted from his apartment for lease violations he didn't know he'd committed. The loan shark he owed money to suddenly decided to call in the debt with extreme prejudice. He was fired from his job after an anonymous tip about him skimming from the register proved true. Within 2 days, he was broken, destitute, and terrified. He disappeared from the city and from Anna's life like a ghost. The sheer, silent efficiency of it was more frightening than any bomb or bullet. It was the power to unmake a person without leaving a single fingerprint. That night, a storm rolled in off the ocean, battering the villa's reinforced windows. Matteo was asleep, blessedly peaceful for once. Anna found Luca in his office, staring out at the violent sea, a glass of amber liquid in his hand. The room was dark, save for the flashes of lightning that illuminated his stark profile. "He's gone," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "He won't bother you again," Luca replied, his back still to her. The finality in his tone sent a shiver down her spine. "Why?" she asked, the question encompassing everything: the protection, the silent erasure of Mark, the impenetrable fortress he had built around himself and his son. He turned then, and in the flash of lightning she saw that the vault was open. The grief and regret inside were raw, unguarded. "Because I know what happens when you fail to see a threat," he said, his voice rough with an old pain. "Because I was careless once before, and it cost me everything." He told her then about his wife, Isabella. About their life before Matteo, a life that had been a careful balancing act between the legitimate empire he was building and the violent heritage he could never fully escape. The Volkovs, the same family that had attacked the aquarium, had been their rivals for generations. They had targeted him, planting a bomb in his car. But Isabella had taken the car that day, an impromptu shopping trip, a simple change in routine that had ended her life and shattered his. "I was on a business call," he confessed, his voice cracking with self-loathing. "Arguing over a percentage point while my wife was, I should have been there. I should have protected her." His all-consuming control, his paranoia, his ruthless protection of his son, it wasn't just about love. It was penance. It was a desperate, unending battle against the ghosts of his own failure. He was not just shielding Matteo from the world. He was shielding himself from the agony of losing someone he loved again. And as Anna looked at him, at the profound wound he carried beneath the armor, she finally understood the man behind the monster. Part 4. The confession, torn from the deepest, most guarded part of him, changed everything. The walls between them did not so much crumble as dissolve, washed away by a shared understanding of pain and survival. The charged tension that had defined their interactions softened into something more fragile, more real. He had seen the ugliness of her past and had eradicated it with brutal finality. She had seen the source of his deepest wound and had not flinched away. In the sterile quiet of the cliffside villa, a tentative, desperate intimacy began to take root. It started with small gestures. He would seek her out in the evenings, not in his office or in the formal living areas, but in the kitchen, where she would be reading after Matteo was asleep. They would talk for hours, their conversations meandering from his complex business dealings to her simple dreams of one day opening her own small school. He began to smile, a rare, startling event that transformed his harsh features, revealing a warmth she never thought possible. She, in turn, found herself seeking his company, comforted by his steady, protective presence. Their first kiss was not a moment of explosive passion, but one of quiet inevitability. They were standing on the balcony off his office, the night air cool and salty, the distant lights of the city glittering like fallen stars. He had been telling her about his childhood, about the weight of the Caprese name, and had fallen silent, his gaze lost in the darkness. She reached out, her fingers gently touching the faint scar on his lip. "Does it hurt?" she asked softly. His storm-gray eyes met hers, and they were filled with a raw, aching vulnerability. "Not anymore," he murmured, and then he leaned in and captured her lips with his. It was a kiss of gratitude, of sorrow, of a desperate, burgeoning hope. It was the taste of a man who had forgotten what it felt like to be touched with tenderness, and it undid her completely. From that moment, their romance blossomed in the sheltered confines of the villa, a secret garden in a world of concrete and steel. They found solace in each other's arms, their nights filled with a passion that was both fierce and healing, a silent acknowledgement of the life and warmth they had found in the midst of so much darkness. Luca offered her the world. He spoke of a future not as a hypothetical but as a certainty. "Stay," he said to her one night, his hand entwined with hers as they lay in his bed, the sound of the ocean a soothing rhythm outside. "Stay with me, Anna, be a mother to Matteo, be my wife." He promised her a life of unimaginable luxury, of absolute security. He would give her anything she wanted, protect her from anything she feared. It was a promise of a fairy tale, but Anna knew that every fairy tale has its price. The cost of his love was becoming terrifyingly clear. The Volkovs, humiliated by their failure at the aquarium and enraged by Luca's tightening grip on the city's legitimate and illegitimate enterprises, escalated their campaign. They were no longer just targeting his business, they were targeting his heart. The first incident was subtle. A drone, small and black, hovered outside Matteo's bedroom window before a guard shot it out of the sky. The second was more direct. The brakes on the car Anna used for supervised trips with Matteo into a secure private park were tampered with. Only the skill of her driver, one of Luca's most trusted men, prevented a catastrophic accident. The near miss left Anna shaken to her core. She had been holding Matteo's hand, laughing at something he'd said, and a second later they were swerving wildly, the scream of tires echoing in her ears. The danger was no longer an abstract concept, a byproduct of Luca's life. It was immediate, personal, and aimed directly at her and the child she loved. She was his weakness, the new chink in his armor, and his enemies knew it. That night she confronted him, her fear warring with her love. "I can't live like this, Luca. I can't let Matteo live like this, always looking over our shoulder, waiting for the next attack." He held her, his grip tight, his own face a mask of controlled fury. "I will handle it," he vowed, the words a low, dangerous growl. "I will end them, I promise you, Anna, I will keep you both safe." It was the promise of a king, a CEO, a mafia boss. But as she looked into his eyes, she saw the ghost of Isabella, of a promise made once before and broken by fate. She had to decide if she could bear the weight of such a vow, if the love they had found was worth a lifetime spent in the crosshairs. Part 5. The betrayal came from within, as it so often does. It was subtle, a series of small, seemingly insignificant security lapses that created a single, fatal window of opportunity. A gate sensor that momentarily failed, a new guard whose background check was not as thorough as it should have been, a communications blackout that lasted for precisely 90 seconds. It was a perfectly executed plan, and it was devastatingly effective. Anna was reading a story to Matteo in his playroom, the afternoon sun streaming through the panoramic windows when it happened. She heard a muffled shout from the hallway, followed by a sickening thud. Before she could react, the door burst open. 2 men, their faces covered by black ski masks, stormed in. One grabbed her, his hand clamped brutally over her mouth, while the other snatched a terrified Matteo, who could only let out a small, strangled cry before he was bundled away. Anna fought with a ferocity she didn't know she possessed, kicking and biting, her mind screaming his name. But it was useless. A sharp, stinging pain exploded at the base of her skull, and the world dissolved into blackness. When she woke, Luca was by her side, his face a terrifying canvas of ice-cold rage and raw despair. The news was the worst imaginable. Matteo was gone. The Volkovs had him, and their demand was absolute. It wasn't for money. It was for everything. Luca was to cede control of the ports, dissolve his holdings in Caprici Global, and publicly abdicate his power, effectively destroying the empire his family had built over a century. He was to burn his world to the ground in exchange for his son's life. Luca didn't hesitate. He was ready to give them anything to become nothing to get his son back. His men were preparing, not for a rescue, but for a surrender. As the grim reality of their situation settled over the villa, a suffocating blanket of grief, Anna's mind raced, pushing past the pain in her head, frantically searching for something, anything that could help. She closed her eyes, forcing herself to think. The kidnappers would be smart. They wouldn't take him anywhere obvious. They would be in a place that was isolated, secure. She thought about Matteo, about their conversations, trying to grasp a thread. And then it came to her. A small, insignificant detail. A few days ago, on one of their supervised outings to a cliffside park, Matteo had become fascinated by a sound, a deep, mournful horn that echoed across the water. His driver had told them it was the foghorn from the old lighthouse on the abandoned wharfs, a part of the city that was a derelict maze of crumbling warehouses and forgotten docks, a place the Volkovs had once controlled. "The foghorn," she said suddenly, her voice hoarse. Luca looked at her, his eyes hollow. "What?" "Matteo," she explained, her words coming faster. "He loved the foghorn. At the park he kept trying to mimic it. He said it sounded like a sad giant. If he heard it, he would feel. Not safe, but maybe calmer. It's a sound he knows." It was a sliver of a hope, a desperate guess, but it was more than they had. Luca's eyes, which had been dead with despair, ignited with a terrifying light. He grabbed a map of the city's coastline, the old wharfs. It was a perfect hiding place, defensible, familiar territory for the Volkovs, and directly across the bay from the park where Matteo had heard the sound. The switch from CEO to Mafia boss was instantaneous and absolute. The plans for surrender were scrapped. This would be a reckoning. Luca didn't lead his men from an office. He went himself, clad in black, his face carved from granite. It was not a battle, it was an extermination. The fight was brutal, swift, and final, a whirlwind of controlled violence in the echoing, cavernous space of a decaying fish-packing warehouse. Luca found Matteo in a small, damp office, physically unharmed but catatonic with fear, clutching his little red toy car. When Luca swept him into his arms, the boy finally broke, his small body racked with sobs. The Volkov Syndicate, as a force in the city, ceased to exist that night. Luca returned to the villa with his son, the sun just beginning to rise, painting the sky in soft shades of pink and gray. He walked into the living room where Anna had been waiting, a sleepless, prayerful vigil. She saw Matteo, safe in his father's arms, and her knees went weak with relief. Luca gently handed the sleeping boy to his housekeeper before turning to Anna. He was covered in grime and blood, some his, some not, but all she saw was the man who had walked through fire to save their son. He crossed the room and pulled her into his arms, holding her as if he would never let her go. "It's over," he whispered into her hair. "It's finished." They both knew it was true, but the victory felt different this time. It wasn't a triumph of power, but a stark, undeniable lesson. The life he had inherited, the cycle of violence and retribution, would always put the people he loved in harm's way. He could win every battle, but he would never win the war. He could never guarantee their safety, while he remained a king in a kingdom of shadows. A week later, Luca Caprese announced a massive restructuring of his empire. He sold off the shipping and logistics divisions, the historical heart of his family's power and the source of its underworld connections. He poured billions into legitimate tech and philanthropy, publicly severing all ties with his family's bloody past. He was reshaping his world, not for power or for wealth, but for them. Their future was not sealed in a boardroom or with a contract, but in the quiet, candle-lit confines of the old Sicilian chapel hidden behind a bakery in the city's oldest quarter. It was a place where generations of Caprese men had made oaths of loyalty and vengeance. But on this day, with only Matteo, clutching both of their hands, as their witness, Luca and Anna made a different kind of vow. It was not an oath of power, but a promise of peace, a promise of family. A promise of a future, finally and truly safe, built not on fear, but on a love that had been tested in the crucible of violence and had emerged, scarred but unbreakable.